Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts versus Jayden Daniels. Oh man, we are in for some fun offensive performances this weekend. We dig into the 2 conference championship games and discuss the best and worst DFS plays on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. All right, these games this weekend are a lot of fun. And obviously the big matchup of the weekend that everyone's talking about is Patrick Mahomes against Josh Allen, right? So let's just start there because we're going to talk about who we like in DFS, who we're kind of staying away from. And if you don't play DFS, it's just daily fantasy football, and you make a lineup just like you do in the regular season, but you're competing against a lot more people because normally they're tournaments. But Josh Allen, I feel like he's going to have pretty much just a perfect game to take down Patrick Mahomes. Who are you liking better this week for fantasy purposes, Mahomes or Allen?
Yeah, no matter what DFS site you play on, FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever, Josh Allen is the most expensive. Patrick Mahomes is the cheapest of the 4 quarterbacks in action in conference championship weekend. So that's what you have to decide. What's going to be your return? And there's a significant drop from Allen to Mahomes. If you look at it, I mean, it's $1,000 totally on FanDuel, and it's a little bit closer there on other sites. But when you look at Mahomes versus Allen, that's going to come down to if you think Josh Allen is going to have a big game and he's going to have to put up some numbers, then it should say that Mahomes is going to have to respond and have a big game as well for the Chiefs to win. And I think he's aware. I mean, he knows what the score was in the November matchup. It was 30-21. So the Chiefs have to put up points. Their defense has been pretty good all year, but this is the one matchup they struggled in. They're just all over the field. They really spread the ball around pretty well, and that really helped Josh Allen. Then he had that, of course, dazzling rushing touchdown to put the game away. That really kind of stamped his day. Otherwise, it would have been a little bit shaky, right? He wouldn't have had the second touchdown. He would have been around 30 rushing yards in that game with 1 passing TD. So, as James Cook had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. So, he needed kind of that spark to do that. So, Mahomes kind of did it to the air a little bit. And right now, the Chiefs' running game stinks. Like, they were going to try. The Bills are pretty weak against the run, so that might be some of their game plan. But the Chiefs just can't block it up here. So I think they're going to be aggressive and throw. I think the Bills actually might need to lean on the run a little bit more. So that says if I'm going by who's going to throw it up, I look at Mahomes. I think Josh Allen outscores Mahomes because of the running. But again, it's all relation to cost here. So if I'm going by cost and what I think I'll get per point, I think Mahomes is slightly better value, and he gives you a lot more flexibility this week at other positions. And I think that's key because you want to pick the best from a limited number of games. And you don't have a lot out there that's surefire at running back, wide receiver, tight end.
I would actually go the Josh Allen side. Mahomes has just been such a low ceiling type of play all year long with a low floor. I mean, last week they won the game, right? He scores 12 fantasy points. Well, Josh Allen only had 127 passing yards and still got to 19 fantasy points, right? In the wild card round in a tougher matchup against the Broncos defense, 26 fantasy points. Last year in the divisional round, these two met, right? And Mahomes won 27-24, but he scored 18 fantasy points to Josh Allen's 31. So I'm willing to pay up the extra $1,000 and looking elsewhere to take that, the upside of Josh Allen and just such a safe floor too with Mahomes. How many times have we seen this year? 12, 13, 14 points. And I feel like his ceiling is 20. They just don't need him as much he's just not doing as much. But I will say in the other matchup, there's a quarterback I like better than Josh Allen, and that's Jayden Daniels. And I get it. We got the Jayden Daniels, Jalen Hurts thing. I think my least favorite quarterback right now is Jalen Hurts. We'll get into why here in a moment. But Jayden Daniels has been on fire, and I get he has a hard matchup on the road, but he's been on the road these first two matchups in the playoffs, and it's like it's not affecting him. The postseason has not been too big for him. He's putting up a crazy amount of fantasy points. He's scored at least 22 fantasy points in each of his last 7 games, full games played. And he had a career high 34 fantasy points against the Eagles last time he played him. So I think Jayden Daniels, who's cheaper than Josh Allen, but he is the second most expensive quarterback, I think he's the way to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you also look at the Eagles, they've actually shown some cracks against the run here in the playoffs. I mean, Josh Jacobs was relentless against them. Kyren Williams, if he hadn't fumbled, could have been a different outcome. I mean, we might talk about the Rams versus the Commanders at this point. So when you look at that, I mean, the Eagles were very good against running backs, but I think that's going to help a little bit that Jayden Daniels can run and open things up. I think their running backs had a nice rebound game last week in a hard matchup in Detroit. So their offensive line is playing well from that aspect and the run blocking. So I think this could be a game where Daniels opts to use his legs a little bit more. That actually hasn't been a big part of what he does so far in the playoffs because he's passing so well and putting up numbers that way. And he's got a lot of kind of cheapy rushing touchdowns stolen from other guys. So I wish they'd use Daniels more in scoring position as a runner. That'd be great. I think maybe it'll come next year, but it's also protecting him to throw downfield and do all that stuff here. Yeah, Jalen Hurts you cannot go with. Look, the Commanders and Eagles are two pretty good pass defenses here. I think Eagles win. They're just going to have to be really run dependent. I also don't know how much Hurts can run with that knee injury, right? We didn't see him run at all after he got hurt in the game, and they were kind of iffy about it this week. And then on the Eagles side, you also have a defensive concern with Quinyon Mitchell. I think he could play. That would open things up a little bit more in that passing game, which has now got both Terry McLaurin and Diami Brown. So I do like Daniels. If I'm going to pay up, I'm going to go Daniels because I look at it this way, right? Josh Allen, you're already paying at the top. So if he's finished at the top, that's where you had him. But Daniels could easily go to the top as the number 2. And then I think Mahomes is a better value than Hurts as the number 4 there. So that's how I look at it there, only because you have limited options and you do have to consider the other positions.
Yeah. Daniels is my favorite choice, then Josh Allen, and then Patrick Mahomes, and then Jalen Hurts, even considering cost. But Hurts is $300 more than Mahomes. The biggest thing with Hurts is knee injury, right? It's not like maybe he's able to scramble a bit, but last week we saw they weren't willing to do the tush push with him near the goal line, right? And that's the big worry. Like that's where he gets all of his rushing touchdowns. It's not like they're coming from long. It's when they get stopped near the goal line, they do the tush push. Will they do that this week? I don't know. And without that, then you're really limiting his ceiling and getting those touchdowns there. So it's just too many worries altogether for Hurts. So I'm staying away. We are going to now get into the wide receivers and tight ends. I mean, it's interesting because especially the wide receivers in the Chiefs-Bills game. I mean, there's not a lot of great options, right? The best option might be Travis Kelce. We'll talk about that. And then in the Eagles-Commanders game, you have Eagles, who knows what they're going to do is, in the passing game. They haven't done much. And then the Eagles have a good defense. So a lot to talk about there. We'll get into that right after a quick break. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans. And for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month. And show your support for the show. Again, that's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Vinnie, I'm going to just say, I think one of my favorite plays of the week is getting Travis Kelce in as a flex play. There's not a lot of elite options out there for running back, wide receiver, tight end, right? And Travis Kelce at his cost, especially on FanDuel, he's at 6,800. That's sixth highest cost among flex. But I actually think he's the second best flex option available this week, right behind Saquon Barkley. So in that case, you're saving a ton of money on a guy that it's a really good value. And I mean, it's now what he does in the playoffs is absolutely absurd. But over his last 14 playoff games, he has averaged over 20 fantasy points per game and half PPR. And that's what the FanDuel scoring is. He comes out for these games. He's had 14 straight games of 70 plus receiving yards in the playoffs. Longest streak in the NFL history, but like it's double the second longest streak. Antonio Brown has the second longest streak at 7 games of 70 plus receiving yards in the playoffs, and he's at 14 straight. No one can stop Travis Kelce in the playoffs. He's amazing. You got to get him into your lineup.
Yeah, I think he's a must play this week, however, and I think I do like your idea of flex because then you can get a good tight end bargain there. And there are some bargains actually with these guys that are out, even maybe his teammate Noah Gray, if you really wanted to get nuts and lock up any tight end touchdowns from Mahomes this week. But when you look at Kelce, I think it's just a matter of him being well rested. He had the 2 weeks off near the end of the season. We know what happens. We know who's up there with Taylor Swift. Now Caitlin Clark has joined the bandwagon. Well, she was already a Chiefs fan, but now she's up there. So it's like it's business as usual, right? They just flip the switch, and the Chiefs are back to being their playoff form, especially with Kelce. Now, I think the Bills will try maybe to double team. They do have Matt Milano back, which is a big deal here. But again, I don't know how much Milano can stop him. Kelce is still going to be schemed open well here. They'll run different routes for him to get him open. Andy Reid is going to anticipate the way they're going to defend him. So they'll get him open for sure. The key, I think, for the Chiefs is stretching the field a little bit. They need to take a shot or two early to make the Bills think about it. Then you get the intermediate routes going here. But there's another reason I like Mahomes. I think the Chiefs are going to come out pass happy, kind of anticipating they got to score more against the Bills, and their running game is not something to rely upon. If that's the case, Kelce will get the targets, he'll get the production, and be the number one receiver for Mahomes.
Yeah, I think he definitely will be the number one receiver in this game. So that brings me to the next question, because the really only reliable, I should say, and he didn't do anything last week, but Chiefs wide receiver over the last month and a half has been Xavier Worthy, right? Like Marquise Brown looked like maybe he'd be something the first game he came back, but he hasn't been anything at all since then. DeAndre Hopkins has been basically a ghost, right? So it's Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce. Worthy's actually priced more than the Bills wide receiver one, Khalil Shakir, just by $100. They're back to back, but Khalil Shakir is the cheapest wide receiver one of all of the whole weekend, right? And I think Shakir probably has a safer floor and about the same ceiling as Worthy. Maybe Worthy has a little bit higher of a ceiling, but like they're both about 70 yards and a touchdown is basically their ceiling, it feels like. So I like Shakir this week, and I like his value.
Yeah, it's funny you said 70 yards because it's exactly what Shakir put up in the first game without a touchdown. We would use the score to really get the return here. And look, he's a tough guy to trust to score, and so is Worthy. It has to be kind of on an odd play because, again, they're not getting a lot of deep ball touchdowns. The Bills don't give up a lot of that. And Worthy's going to maybe have a wrinkle play, right, where he gets it on a reverse or something to score. Well, I think there's a fair chance Shakir can score, but when you're looking just for pure targets, catches, yards, I think it does favor Shakir in this game, just based on the matchups. Now you want to get things going here for these offenses. And look, I think he, for better for worse, is Josh Allen's go-to guy in big moments and in bigger games because he can get open pretty well. He can do things after the catch. And Josh Allen really spread the ball around, and really Mahomes does that too. So unfortunately, I don't think you can expect a big game from any wide receiver. Therefore, just say go cheap, save some money, and then make sure you can do some flexibility with your other positions.
Yeah, like Shakir last week. I mean, even Josh Allen throws for 127 passing yards. Shakir has 67 of those.
Yeah.
Over 50% of his passing yards. Like he was pretty much, I mean, the next closest wide receiver to him was Matt Collins with 1 reception for 12 yards. James Cook was the second highest receiver on that team at 3 receptions for 15 yards. Like Shakir, it looks like Josh Allen is just depending on him. And it's funny because Keon Coleman's actually the one that's been on the field the most, and Matt Collins. But they're not really getting anything. And whenever Shakir and Curtis Samuel are on the field, they're getting more. So you'd think they want him on the field a little bit more. But what about the other guys? Like I just brought up, Matt Collins, Amari Cooper. I don't think he can go with the Hollywood Brown or Hopkins route. Any of those guys of interest to you? Maybe Curtis Samuel. He had a pretty solid game the last time they played the Chiefs. 5 receptions, 58 yards, and a touchdown. Would you go to Curtis Samuel for cheap?
Yeah, I mean, go as cheap as you can for these situations. I mean, I'm not going nuts and getting like a Chiefs buried wide receiver right on the depth chart, but I think it's hard because in some places Hopkins is more than Brown. Some places Brown is more than Hopkins. So when you look at that, look, do you want to roll the dice on one of them? If I had to go with the one, I would say it's Hopkins, because again, with Brown, he's just got back in the lineup. He's kind of negated by Worthy being a big play threat, where Hopkins, they could use a little bit more if Kelsey gets covered. So if I had to go somewhere in the Chiefs, I might go for the cheap version of Hopkins. Otherwise, I'm going to pivot and get more options from the other game. And Amari Cooper, look, he is the cheapest in relation to those two Chiefs veterans wide receivers, but I still can't go nuts about Cooper. I know he's had some games with the Raiders. He was very limited with his targets in the first matchup. He did get to over 50 receiving yards, but I don't think he's going to get a 30-yard play again. Let's just say that to help him there. So I think I'm out on Cooper. I think Samuel makes a lot of sense if you're trying to save money again. If that's the only investment you have at wide receiver, that's fine. You can go to the other game and find some better values.
Now, what about these Eagles wide receivers and A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith? A.J. Brown has been not anything, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, over his 4 playoff games that he's played with the Eagles and playoff wins, he has been held to under 30 receiving yards and 0 touchdowns in those 4 games. The only good game he had was in their loss in the Super Bowl, 6 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. But like, will Brown come to life? He'll have Marshawn Lattimore on him, which he did do very well against him in week 16. And just in that game. Now, he did have 15 targets. It took him 15 targets to get to 97 yards and a touchdown, and that was with Kenny Pickett. Will he come to life, or is it a Devonta Smith game? Because Smith also has been held under check as of late, too.
Yeah, when you look at the efficiency numbers, they weren't good. I mean, you can debate all that matchup, who got the better of it, right? I mean, if you look at, he got all this volume, and then he eventually produced. And then specifically, Lattimore, I think, also had a penalty in that game. That was big.
3 of them. He did pass interference on A.J. Brown specifically 3 times in that game.
One, I think, was for more than 30 yards. So there was one. So that you kind of count that a little bit and getting the flags. But unfortunately for fantasy, that doesn't count. So he can maul him and be physical, and we're not going to get credit for that in fantasy. So keep that in mind. So the question is he going to get the volume, right? It's been five targets. He's not getting open. Lattimore can get physical with him. A.J. Brown in general has not been a good playoff receiver. So maybe the lights are on. He's not doing the things to get open. So I think this could be a Devonta Smith game. There is some hope for him a little bit, working in the slot, working on the number 2. That could be against Mike Sainistral from Michigan and gets that matchup, or the inside matchup. Either one is better than Lattimore and a size that can kind of push him around a little bit. So they got to get Devonta Smith going. I think it's been underrated. Everyone's focused on Brown and what he's not doing, but Smith should be doing something, right? If Brown's covered, why isn't Smith getting the ball? And maybe he's slowed down a little bit himself. So, again, I would go with Smith. I think I would, however, prefer the guy on the other side, Terry McLaurin, because, again, I look at McLaurin. He's going to have the best matchup here because Quinyon Mitchell is banged up. You look at Darius Slay, he could end up on the side of Diami Brown. So that tells me McLaurin is the one receiver, all the receivers in these 2 games that I think I want, and everyone else, again, save as much money as possible. So that's what would tell me to go to Smith. I'm not willing to go to Jahan Dotson, but I would be happy if I played McLaurin, Smith, and Samuel as my receivers this week.
Yeah, and Diami Brown's not too expensive either. Like you said, maybe he gets a tough matchup with Darius Slay, but Brown has been fantastic, right? He's getting playing time. All of a sudden, he's broken out. Does he continue that breakout? It's been 89 and a touchdown in the wild card round, 98 yards in the divisional round. I mean, I didn't believe in him going into last week's game at all, but maybe it was just because it was against the Lions, right? It was such an easy matchup. I liked the other guys because I thought maybe Diami Brown had his 1 week. They're going to go to another guy. Like, are we going to overhype him now? And it's a way harder matchup for Brown. So maybe you just stay away from Brown and only go with Terry McLaurin, kind of leaning that way now. Is that how you'd go?
Yeah, I just can't go to Brown. I mean, he could break out and it would not surprise me, but I just don't also like the way the Eagles are throwing the ball right now. And Hurts, if he's limited running, they're going to be really dependent on Saquon Barkley, and they should be because the Commanders stink against the run. I would feed Barkley as much as possible. He's been carrying you. The only thing is he could get worn down here. He's had a lot of work here. So they need to kind of give some explosive plays downfield to open up that running game, or you think the Commanders just might be, okay, Lattimore will go do this. We'll try to stop the run and commit an extra guy to try to stop Barkley. It may not work, but I think that's the way the game plan could go here for the Commanders. So, again, I just can't go A.J. Brown. I want to so badly.
Yeah.
But he's just too expensive. His price didn't come down even after these 2 bad playoff games.
Yeah, I mean, A.J. Brown's the most expensive wide receiver by far this weekend. It doesn't make sense. So do not go. It doesn't mean he can't have a good game. 98 yards and touchdown could happen, but he is the most expensive by far. So you need him to perform so much better than everyone else. And that just seems really, really risky when he has not done it lately at all. Now, I like both tight ends this week in Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. I think they're both good values. If you go with Kelsey in the flex, I think you throw one of those in and Goddard or Ertz, who have been performing, and you're in a good spot. But we got to get to these running backs because Saquon Barkley is expensive, but I'm telling you, I think it's worth it. And then the other guys, it gets a little sketchy. But we'll get to that right after a quick break.
All right, it is the playoff ending here coming up, but the conference championships are here. Then there will be the Super Bowl. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel has been making the NFL playoffs even more exciting for you. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app is so easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting, and definitely a lot of variety that you want to get into with 2 games on the table. I do like the Chiefs and the small favorite spread to win, and I like the Commanders to pull the upset this week. So those are my bets I'm going with. When you win, and you can make your own bets there, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's only at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable before it's too late with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Michelle, time to close the show looking at the running backs, and we got to start right at the top. Last week in FanDuel points, he had 40 points. He ran for 205 yards. It was Saquon Barkley. We know he's the best running back on the board, but the question is, he's 9,800, well more expensive than the next back. It drops off, I believe, to a 7,100 value. And if you're playing on DraftKings, it drops from 8,600 to 6,900. So you're paying a lot, but think about it. 40, when you look at 99.8 times 3, he gave you easily 3x return last week. That means he can do it again. And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have him in your lineup because maybe James Cook can have a good game at 7,100, but like against the Chiefs, hard defense, you struggled against them last time, and most running backs have struggled. Then you're getting into the Brian Robinson, Kareem Hunt, like Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, these guys, you're hoping for 10 points, right? They're definitely not getting you 3 times likely. Your payback with Barkley. Even though he's a super high price, he's going like, I just can't see him not returning his value. I mean, he scored at least 27 fantasy points in each of his last 3 matchups against the Commanders dating back to the 2023 season. Jahmyr Gibbs just put up 33 points against the Commanders last week. Barkley has averaged 137 scrimmage yards per game in his 11 games against the Commanders. That's the most by any player versus any opponent in the Super Bowl era that has played a team 10 times. He's amazing, right? He's had over 150 scrimmage yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in both matchups against the Commanders this year. He needs to be in lineups, and I think people are going to be scared because of the price, but you can't, scared money don't make money is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you're trying to get the most return. So if I'm going for the most return, I think it has to be Barkley and then Cook. And then you can figure out the rest of your lineups later. But it's much easier to get those points out of Curtis Samuel on the cheap versus playing Isaiah Pacheco or Kareem Hunt, right? You could get a few catches in the full PPR format, and then you're in business here. If I had to play one of these running backs, I would play Brian Robinson Jr. because of the cheapies of the touchdowns that he can get, and we know he can be a multiple touchdown scorer. And again, the Eagles have struggled a bit against the power run. We saw how relentless Jacobs was and Williams was working in the middle of that defense. You kind of have to wear down Jalen Carter and that group if you're going to have a shot to beat them. So if I go Brian Robinson, that's fine, but I'd much rather go Barkley and Cook. Cook, look, tough matchup against the Chiefs, but last time he scored 2 touchdowns. He didn't get going, but he scored twice, and that put him right at that 3x return at his current price. So getting him near 20 points is getting you near 3x at 7,100. So yeah, Barkley and Cook can definitely combine to do that. And then look, that's all it is about, right? Getting 3x, where can you get it? If you spend here, then you're getting 3x from like a Samuel, right? You're in business here. So I think you have to think about it. That's also why I was thinking ahead and putting Mahomes as the cheap quarterback so I can make sure I can get these guys as much as possible in lineups.
Yeah, and honestly, like the Jayden, I've played around with the lineups. You can get Jayden Daniels and Kelsey and Saquon Barkley pretty easily this week. You don't have to get like too insane. Yeah. You could still get, you're going to have to go a bit cheaper on wide receivers, but it's not like you're going to be playing names. It's not like you have to go so bad where you have to play a Mac Hollins or anything like that. Brian Robinson Jr., though, you mentioned him. He finally had a good game last week. 77 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 15 carries. He didn't get a single target, though. That's kind of not ideal. I would rather go with Brian Robinson Jr. than Austin Eckler because it just seems like Austin Eckler's not getting a very much usage. And I mean, if Brian Robinson Jr. can look like he did last week, like he looked good out there, right? Yeah. And we haven't seen that in a while. The Eagles can be a bit stingy against the run, but like you mentioned, in these 2 playoff games this year, they've been letting these running backs run on them with ease. It's not like these running backs have gotten a lot of volume on them, but whenever they do run, they're picking up 4 or 5 yards at a time.
Yeah, it's frustrating because Brian Robinson Jr. looked terrible in the first game against the Buccaneers. Then all of a sudden he came to life against all defenses. The Lions have been pretty good against the run. I guess they've wilted in recent weeks there, but still to finish. But again, he's a touchdown-dependent guy. Look, we know that him and James Cook have the potential in a game to get the ball multiple times in scoring position. That's kind of a lot of their scoring has been. I mean, Cook has got some other numbers that helped him. He had the 16 touchdowns to tie with Derrick Henry. So he was a scoring machine. But Robinson, when he's healthy, was the guy they turned to in those short situations. Seems like the Bills and the Commanders have a lot of those short scoring situations. The difference is I think Brian Robinson gets that call versus Jayden Daniels, where often Josh Allen can steal a Cook touchdown. So that's what you look at. But again, you're touchdown dependent with Robinson, but I think that's why you might have to go Barkley and Cook because you can get the receiving production as well as the big rushing day and the scoring.
And then can you play either Chiefs running back? I think if you're going to go with one, it has to be Kareem Hunt. He played nearly 50% of the snaps last week in the divisional round. Pacheco only 30% at 5 carries for 18 yards. Hunt did look better with 8 carries for 44 yards. Neither of them were really used as a receiver. Both just got 1 target. And then Hunt got the touchdown, of course. Like, I think if you're going to go with one, it can be Hunt because I won't be shocked, right, if at the end of the game Hunt has 2 rushing touchdowns. Like, that's not going to be like flabbergasting me, right? So if you're going to go with one, I'm going to go with Hunt. But obviously neither one is like super exciting.
Yeah, I think Pacheco's not fully healthy and he's just not running right. And the other thing Kareem Hunt can do, maybe you have to do old school Browns Kareem Hunt and get him involved in the passing game. Really, it's old school Chiefs Kareem Hunt. Like, throw to him a little bit. The Bills still struggle there. You can beat them in those situations. So maybe that helps Hunt. Maybe Andy Reid has a different wrinkle in mind. Maybe Xavier Worthy gets like 3 or 4 carries. I don't know. But they got to get the running game, got to get it sparked somehow. But I think Hunt has a better path through the scoring and receiving this week than anything Pacheco could do.
Now, would you Brian Robinson Jr. or Kareem Hunt? Which one would you go with?
That's a tough call. I think I would go Brian Robinson only because I would not like to attach myself to the Chiefs running game as much as possible. Like if I had to, I guess I would, but the difference in price is not that great where I want to force myself into Casey's backfield.
Yeah, it's only a 400-yard difference. And now, would you go with Pacheco or Eckler? if you had to pick one?
I think I would go Eckler because of the receptions, right? Pacheco's not going to give you that. If he's not catching the ball and he's not seeing the ball in high leverage situations, I don't see where his fantasy value is. And I just think there's going to be some wrinkle with the Chiefs backfield that we're going to see in this game. And I don't know what it is, but I think I can trust the other backs usage this week. The two workhorses, Barkley and Cook, and then the Eckler Robinson situation seems pretty clear to me now at this point.
Yeah. All right. That's it for today's episode. We'll be talking more DFS, giving you our PrizePicks picks of the week and our FanDuel lineup officially. We'll reveal both of our lineups on tomorrow's show. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.